Hey guys, it's Miss Vinson. So this is going to be the solutions for the micro unit 4 cost curves free response question. Now this one's super important to go over because all businesses are going to have cost. All businesses are going to have variable costs that get more or less expensive depending on how much stuff you're producing. And when we think variable, we're pretty much thinking labor there. And all businesses are going to have fixed cost in the short run. Fixed costs are costs whose amount stays the same no matter how much you're producing, like your rent. Remember that with your rent, you got to pay your rent even if you're serving no customers. So the picture we have here should look really familiar to you, even if you haven't looked at anything microeconomics since the fall. You should remember our U-shaped cost curves. We have our U-shaped average total cost curve, that's going to be curve 2. We have our U-shaped average variable cost curve beneath it, that's going to be curve 3. And remember how these two curves, average total and average variable, they look like they're going to crash into each other over on the right hand side of the graph because the space in between them is always getting smaller and smaller because that space that's in between ATC and AVC is average fixed cost. So we have average total cost, which is curve 2, average variable cost, which is curve 3. The space between them is average fixed, which keeps getting narrower and narrower. And then we have our big dramatic Nike check that is going right through the minimum points of those two average curves. That is going to be curve 1. That's marginal cost. Remember, we had a big discussion about how marginal leads average around. If your next test grade is below your average, it's going to drag your average down. Well, look at this picture. When that Nike check is below your average curves, it is pulling those average curves down. And then when it crosses and goes above them, when the next thing is higher than the average, it'll pull your average up. So remember, this Nike check always hits them at their minimum points because of that marginal average relationship, how marginal sort of pulls average around. Well, by talking through that, I sort of already answered part A. Part A just wants you to simply identify these curves. That's going to be curve 1 is marginal cost, curve 2 is average total cost, curve 3 is average variable cost. Now part B is asking, why does curve 1, which is marginal cost, go down and then back up? Why are these curves U-shaped? Why would a cost get less expensive and then turn and get more expensive? Well, remember how we talked about it all goes back to what's going on with your workers in your factory. Remember that how productive your workers are is inversely related with your per unit cost. So when your marginal productivity is highest, when your workers are at their highest productivity level, your marginal cost is going to be at its lowest. So when we have increasing returns, when our workers are getting more and more productive and they're making an assembly line, our extra cost to produce the next thing is falling. But that doesn't last forever because eventually productivity is going to start to suffer when we have too many people. When we start to hire too many people, when we start to add too many variable resources into that fixed resource, which is our factory, then all of a sudden things get crowded, things get chaotic. The next person we hire can't produce as much as the previous person because there's not enough tools or there's not enough space. And so at some point, marginal productivity is going to turn and go down and start to diminish. So as our marginal productivity falls, as our workers get less and less productive, our marginal cost is going to turn and skyrocket because of diminishing marginal returns. Now we've already answered C as well. C says, what's that vertical gap between curve 2 and curve 3 that always is getting smaller? Well, we just said that's our average fixed cost. Part D follows up on that and says, well, why does that vertical space always keep getting smaller and smaller? Remember that we said average fixed cost always decreases because we're taking that total fixed cost that never changes and we keep dividing it over more and more output levels or a bigger and bigger quantity. And as your denominator gets bigger, your answer gets smaller. Part E says, using the letters on the graph, identify at least 2 points on this firm's short-run supply curve. Even though we don't outright see a supply curve on this graph, we did mention back in the fall that the marginal cost curve can be a stand-in for your supply curve. How can the marginal cost curve be a stand-in for the supply curve again? Well, if the extra cost to produce something is $10, then the lowest amount you're going to be willing to sell it for or supply it for is $10. So the marginal cost shows the lowest amount you would accept for something, which is how much you spent to make it. And that's what a supply curve shows, the quantities you'd be willing to supply or sell at different price levels. So your marginal cost is going to be your stand-in for your supply curve. Remember how we said in the short run, anything below average variable cost, you're going to shut down. So your short run supply curve is only going to be the part of your marginal cost curve that's above the AVC curve. And there's only 2 dots, that is going to be K and L on this graph. All right, guys, see you later.